I am your host, Aquila Cole. And on this platform, we dive deep into the world of countless topics facilitated by the perspective of three experts who are licensed professional counselors, willing to take their professional hats off and have a conversation with you. And we're going to go ahead and introduce them, starting with Miss Megan.
Good morning. My name is Megan Howard. I am a licensed professional counselor licensed in the state of Texas. I hold a master's degree in counseling. I own my own practice virtually, seeing clients all over the state of Texas, assisting adults managing depression, anxiety, trauma, and life transitions. I like to look at life therapy and the opportunity to help others through the lens of life gives us an opportunity to reflect, unlearn, and rebloom to our healthiest selves. And I'm excited about being able to engage in enriching and thought provoking discussions with other professionals without the professional limits.
I love it.
Yes. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Omalola Taiwo. I'm a licensed professional counselor in the state of Texas. I'm also a certified integrative mental health provider, and I offer trauma-informed care for adults, couples, and families who are struggling with unresolved trauma, major depression disorder, generalized anxiety as well. I'm really excited to be here on the Hats Off podcast to have an open dialogue and collaborate with my colleagues on topics that are so controversial, but also necessary to have talks on. And I would say that wherever we are in our journey, it's okay to start over. It's okay to pick a new day one, and to move forward with new awareness.
Yes, love that.
Awesome. Well, hey guys, my name is Constance Elaine. I am also a licensed professional counselor. I actually work for Dallas ISG, but I also operate my own private practice under the name of the Restorative House. We are located in Dallas, Texas, and we work at the intersection of faith and psychology, just really helping women to navigate their intuitive selves from a holistic perspective. I am excited about this opportunity, mainly to just collaborate with fellow clinicians. I'm interested in gaining new perspectives, ideas, and alternatives in terms of how we navigate motherhood, how we navigate singlehood, how we navigate womanhood in general. This is an amazing opportunity. I always like to say, seek wisdom. If you seek wisdom, you'll find life. And so that's why we're here. And I'm excited. Let's go.
Yes, I am thrilled. We are all thrilled to kick off our debut episode. I am particularly eager to collaborate with these incredible women and spotlight Hats Off podcast. In this episode, we will explore the often controversial aspect of parenting and discuss how different approaches impact families. Get ready for a dynamic, thought-provoking discussion. So we will start off with our hot topics. The first one is about our Miss Brittany Watts, who suffered a miscarriage and left the non-viable fetus at home. She will not be facing any charges. The case was dismissed, which highlights the extent to which women can be prosecuted when their pregnancy ends, whether by abortion or miscarriage. Now, this was a hot topic for a moment last year, and I would like to dive into that.
One of the things that I found interesting about this particular story was that Brittany went to the hospital, I think 3 times. So the first time she went was when she found out that the fetus was a non viable fetus. And then she ended up coming back. And when she came back that next time, she had to wait for 8 hours. And I think she was waiting on a doctor, if I'm not mistaken. And whenever she would ask, what's going on, what's an update, she wasn't really given much information and ended up waiting 8 hours. And after that, she left against medical advice. And then she ended up coming back, I think it was the next day. And that day, having to wait for 11 hours, still with no
Hmm.
progress. And I would imagine that at that point, there was a lot of frustration. I'm assuming that there had to have been pain and discomfort for her to go to the hospital in the first place. And this isn't something that's uncommon when it comes to Black women and the medical system, feeling unheard, feeling frustrated, feeling unvalidated and maybe not even feeling prioritized in that. And so I think some may look at it like, well, why would you leave if you know that there's something going on with the baby or with the fetus? But she did go and she stayed and she waited and she was probably uncomfortable. I mean, how comfortable is a hospital or an emergency room? And so if
Right.
I'm here and I'm not getting help, why not go back home to where I can make myself comfortable?
And to that point, I just can't imagine going to receive medical help and you're not getting that support. And so what was the care plan? What was the recommendation for her? What was she supposed to do? Right? Did she feel seen and supported? And I think her being found shopping like afterwards is just a way for her to cope with that traumatic event. And so really identifying like how unsafe it is for women to explore, experience these things without resources, without the proper coping skills, without the proper information to move forward.
Yeah.
I agree with both of you ladies. Initially, I didn't have the perspective of her going to the hospital twice before the miscarriage and having to wait for almost a day's work,
Mm.
to be
Absolutely.
seen.
Yeah.
So my perspective initially was, if I'm honest, pretty biased because I mean
Mm.
there was concern there. I could tell that there had to be some fear, there had to be some confusion, and just not really knowing how to handle that situation. But prior to understanding that she did take the steps, that
Yeah.
she waited, that she did have moments where she was unheard, it just appeared that she was afraid and just kind of took matters into her own hands. What I read was she didn't seek medical attention, or she did, but then she went against recommendations. And then she had a miscarriage and then she went shopping. That's what I read. And so I'm like, huh, all of my opinions were based off of that information, which goes to show that sometimes we can have opinions without having a full story. And so, really leaning into someone's story and into their humanity, and
Yeah.
always having an understanding that there's more to the story than we'll ever know.
Yeah.
And also taking the storyteller into perspective, like who wrote the
Mm.
article that says woman has miscarriage and then goes shopping? Like
Yeah.
you wrote it in a way to make it look bad. And then something else to take into perspective was after the 11-hour doctor visit where she went back home. When she went back home is when she ended up having the miscarriage. I'm assuming that she
Mm,
was in the bathroom or went to the bathroom because something's coming out. So I'm going to go to the bathroom. After
yeah,
the fetus comes into the toilet, what was she supposed to do?
yeah,
I think it speaks volume that, they went that far to prosecute her, and a grand jury had to find her not guilty. So I imagine the situation was traumatizing for her. Now having to go through the criminal charges is even more, issue that's going to transpire in her life later on. So I hope she is getting some type of therapeutic advice or counseling or something to help with the transition.
The black
Yeah.
woman is the most unprotected. How do you say
Mm.
it?
How do you say it?
you said
You said it.
The most unprotected person in America is a black woman, or something to that effect.
Yeah. But I agree with you, Megan, in regards to the article, the title. That was to get your attention.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Like she left the hospital. And like Constance, I did have a different perspective initially. I usually when I open an article, I usually open it with an open mindset. But I'm wondering, what was she thinking? What's going through her mind?
Mhm.
Is this her first child? And then how come she didn't call the police before she went to shopping? Like it's just a lot of questions behind it as well too. That still I don't have answers for them, but
And she did go back after she had the miscarriage in the toilet. She did go back to the hospital.
okay.
She had a DNC, and I guess the nurse, I want to say, like comforted her and prayed with her, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh,
And then when
nice.
they asked, like, where is the fetus, and she's like, well, I disposed of it at home. That's when they called 911, and she was charged because of how she disposed of the corpse.
And this is all
Yeah.
because of the laws, the new laws. of the Roe and Wade that was overturned, right?
Yeah, and had it been a couple of weeks earlier, it would have been different. When the first time she went to the doctor, she was 21 weeks and 6 days, if I'm not mistaken, and 22
Hmm.
weeks is the cutoff.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow. Okay. So that was awesome. So our next headline is actually a woman who was locally here in Texas. A Texas woman divorces her husband to become his guardian. Now she cares for him with her new husband. Now, did y'all hear about this article? Her
Mm.
husband suffered a traumatic injury to the point where he was, I don't want to say paralyzed, but he could no longer take care of himself. So I think and they have children together, by the way. And she waited for years before she got married. So it wasn't like immediately she got married.
Yeah.
Um, the way it reads is like, whoa, she got married.
Like,
But
dang.
her husband actually also, her current husband also helps take care of the ex-husband as well too.
That's an interesting story. A lot of questions come up for me.
Would you be able to do that though? Would you be able to, God forbid something happens to any one of y'all? Would you be able to be remarried and because the Bible says for better or for worse, right? So yeah, she may have divorced him, but she kept him in her home and she's taking care of him. So I don't know if I would be able to do that. I'm not sure because I'm not in the situation. I don't know how I will act, but I imagine that it wasn't easy.
Yeah, I think it matters about the context of the separation and the context of the injury and the true definition of a blended family, right? And what their intentions are. I think just wanting to show up and care for a loved one, even if there isn't a actual marriage in the picture. I think it shows a lot of, heroism and her stepping to that and still living the life that she felt she deserves,
Mhm.
is very
Yeah.
I have questions in regards to I know that that was like the deal going into the new marriage. But what are the beliefs? What are the unspoken inhibitions of her current husband and even her children?
Mm,
You
yeah.
know, there's a lot of unspoken stories that we hold in our hearts, even as we're navigating our daily lives. We leave a lot of our protected selves or our traumatized selves. It kind of stays back. And even though we're progressing, there's still
Yeah.
parts of us that are resistant. And so I just wonder,
Yeah.
like, what it really feels like or looks like for them as they're navigating their daily lives. It is
Mm,
definitely something that I don't feel like I can speak on because, like you, Aquila, I'm married. I don't know if I would be able to move forward, but I believe that there would be times where I feel like I would want to move forward with my life. I just don't know how comfortable I would be to bring another man into my home and then also have that man take care of my, it's kind of
yeah.
messy for me just to even think about it. But that's
Yeah.
my take on it.
I think it's important to acknowledge the grief
Mm,
that is present here, and that is an ongoing grief because you're still having to see him, and the
Yeah.
version of him that you met, the version of him that you married, the version of him that showed up for your family. So being able to hold space for the grief that she's experienced, that she's worked through, and that she's having to continue to work through, I would be curious to know, like, was this a conversation that they've had before? You know how sometimes people
Mhm.
have a conversation
mhm.
with their spouse, like, if anything ever happens to me, like, I
Yeah.
want you to continue to live life to the fullest. I want you to remarry and be happy. Because it's easy on the outside looking in to say, well, she should never get married again. But there is still that desire for connection, for relationship, for intimacy with another person. So I don't know how long it took before she remarried and what that process was like, but being able to take into account the fact that there is still that desire. I'd also be curious to know what his level of functioning is. Like, was he communicative? Was he, I would imagine he's not ambulatory, being that he's needing people to assist him. Is he alert to even know, what's going on? And I think those things being taken into perspective, I think that would speak to the fact of being able to allow somebody else to come in and take that space. Um,
Yeah.
and like you guys said, that option to move forward and continue living life and have that intimacy with someone else, knowing that it may never be what the other one was. Like when people get married and their spouse has passed away, they still have that love for that other person. And you have to be able to accept that as you go into that relationship, but also knowing that there's nothing that can happen right here. So I am moving forward while still holding space for someone that I care about, but they aren't able to show up in the way that they used to.
Yeah. I like that, Megan.
I like that too. And while you were talking, Megan, I was wondering, what about the children? What about them? How are they supposed to go through this or feel? You're my dad, but mom has this other husband, and we all live together in one household. It's a
Can
lot.
you imagine the child, like the school stories, the early elementary school stories? My dad still lives at my house, but I have another dad.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah, I
go
think
ahead.
it also speaks to generational, patterns that you talked about, unspoken things. And I just hear like generational trauma, like how this can have a negative impact on those kids, and
Mm.
how mom decided to move forward with this. It could stem from, her maternal or her paternal side, and just how do they deal with conflict like that, But then I also think there's another side of it that says, she's breaking those generational curses, and she's holding her family together, whereby maybe she doesn't have that history of, toxic or unhealthy dynamics. And so my hope is that she put her best foot forward, and that they were able to make an amicable decision for the entire family.
Yeah.
So, from that article, one thing that she said was when someone has a severe traumatic brain injury in a big way, you lose that person, but you gain somebody new, she said. And it took me a long time to realize that. And then, in regards to the new husband, she said she turned to God and asked for guidance
Mm.
because she still wanted a family.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
to your point, Omalola, the communication, like how are you communicating this to your children? What are you explaining? Are you holding space for their emotions and the questions that they have? Again, acknowledging the ongoing grief that they're going to experience and continuing that conversation, because their level of understanding, I don't know how old they were when it first happened, but their level of understanding is going to increase and expand. So being able to go back and revisit the conversation and revisit the feelings that are presenting as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just continue to be transparent.
Especially as like with grief, it's never actually accomplished. Like we don't get over our grief. So those waves will come later down the line. And so to your point, Megan, holding space for every season or every new wave that comes flooding in, making sure that communication is always open, and that the family is not just operating as that it's more synergistic
Yeah.
and everyone's accepted.
Yeah.
All emotions, all thoughts, all opinions.
So the good thing about this couple or this family is that, they were high school sweethearts. They met in high school. So they were already family, and got married. So you don't abandon family when something happens. So, we can leave that topic with that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, diving into the next thing, our next segment is going to be about the most controversial opinions on parenting that people stand by. I don't know what you have heard, but there's a lot of things out there that people stand by. For example, if you don't vaccinate your children, you are a bad parent. If you aren't 100% ready to support your kids, if they are gay, trans, autistic, or physically disabled, then you shouldn't have kids. Well, it doesn't work like that, but I get what they're saying. You shouldn't have your kids around any and everybody just because y'all date. And if your child says that someone makes them uncomfortable, believe them. Your children are not your retirement plan. So these are the controversial parenting that people stand by. Thoughts?
I think we have
Lots
to
of
hold
thought.
space for everyone in everyone's views. What'd
Yeah.
you say?
She said that's a lot.
Yes, that is. Starting with the vaccination. I mean, everybody has their perspective about how they want their children to grow up, what they're comfortable putting in their bodies, what they're not comfortable putting in their bodies, the research that they're doing, and should they choose not to vaccinate, how they're going to work on their immune system and
Yeah.
build their immune system and, show up for any illnesses. I think it's accurate. Like you have the next one, you have to be open to however your child presents. They're still your child regardless of whether they're gay, whether they're trans, whether they're autistic, whether they're physically disabled. This is your child and you brought them in, and you are the first example of love, of healthy interaction. And so if you are not able to provide that to them, they can go to other spaces and have that unhealthy connection. So you being able to create a safe space for them.
Megan, can I stop you right there? I have a question.
Yeah, I was gonna pause because I was like, that's a lot.
I have a question. So, what if you did encounter a client like that who child, not necessarily trans or autistic or gay, but maybe autistic or physically disabled, and not wanting that child anymore and going through the guilt of not wanting that child? How do you help a person like that?
So look past the person and see the pain. So don't just look
Mm,
at the fact that I don't want the child. Let's look at the why. Grief. We just talked about grief in the last topic, but remembering that grief is not just death. Grief is the loss of something, the loss of a person, the place, idea. So you had
mhm.
this idea of what parenting is going to look like, what your child is going to be like, and then they come and there's a challenge and you've never done this before. You don't know what
Yeah,
to expect. You didn't plan for this. So there's grief associated with the reality of what you're experiencing versus the idea. So being able to hold space and allow them to work through that grief, exploring what they're concerned about, what scares you about this space, what makes you not want to do this.
yeah,
And then from there, being able to identify, okay, well, this is our reality, right? Radical acceptance. How can I move forward? What can that look like? How can I continue to cope? Because, like Constance said, grief is not something that just ends at some point. Every day you wake up, there's going to be a new challenge, and there is more acceptance that you're having to experience as you go through this process. So, just for one, being able to acknowledge the grief that's present, hold space for the grief that's present without shame, because they're experiencing shame other spaces. How could you be a mother
hmm
and feel like that? But hold space for the grief that they're experiencing.
Yeah,
I like that.
I do too. Erickson has a quote, and it says that every parent that's faced with the development of children must constantly live up to a challenge. They must also grow up with that child.
Mm,
Um, and I think that something that you said in the very beginning, Aquila, like people believe that how can you do X, Y, and Z when you have kids? Or why did you have kids when your life isn't stellar? You're irresponsible. You don't have your life together.
yeah.
And you indicated it don't happen like that. And it doesn't. A lot of times when we have kids, most of us have not reached a level of maturity that's required to provide a secure attachment to our children because of our conditioning, how we grew up, how we were raised. Like, this is how generational trauma happens when we don't know what's in our hearts. And life is hard on the heart. So when we go into parenting or any type of endeavor in life, it always the outcome of that endeavor will always begin and end with us. So that's why it's important to do our own work so that we can live up to the challenge. And it's no different with motherhood. If a mom,
Reflecting.
yes, and that radical acceptance piece, Megan, that you indicated, like life happens in the tension, change happens in the tension, love happens in the tension. It doesn't happen on the, external polar extremes, right? It happens right there in the middle, the hard work. That's where growth happens.
Yeah.
Reflecting, unlearning, and reblooming, and then repeat.
Yeah.
Lola, did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. One of these controversial parenting topics that stuck out to me was if your child says that someone makes them uncomfortable, believe them. The parents that we have here on the platform, what's your perspective about that? Because sometimes, your child may say something, especially we run into teenagers these days, they would say things to provoke, maybe your attention, but they don't really mean it, right? But how do you determine what's true or what you should take seriously or you shouldn't take seriously? And that's going to be a challenge for a lot of parents, especially maybe younger parents as well too.
I ain't got no kids, but
Yes, you do. You have a godson. You have a kid.
I have two. I have
You
two
have two.
godchildren. But in regards to what you stated about kids will say stuff to get your attention, I think if we lead with that when we're listening to kids, then that's going to put a filter on what we hear rather
Mm,
than leading with, okay, my child is saying that they're uncomfortable. Let me explore this further. Does that make
yeah.
sense?
Yeah.
So if I
Yeah.
go through with, okay, well, I need to determine what to take in and what not to take. I think we should trust
Mhm.
our child's discomfort and remembering that communication is not just verbal. There's
Mm,
communication is only 30% verbal and 70% nonverbal. So it's not just what they're saying, but how are they behaving? Do they look uncomfortable?
Mhm.
You know when your child is at peace and when they're feeling uncomfortable through their body language, through the way that they're responding. So I think we have to take those things into perspective. Children don't have the filter that we as adults have, right? So as
yeah.
adults, we go into spaces and we're like, we're uncomfortable, but I need to make myself fit. A child is going to look at you and be like, mm-mm.
Mhm.
And we have to trust that.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. I love that. I love that.
I agree with you 100%. I like how you said, look at the behavior, look at how they are reacting. First of all, I mean, you said a whole lot, really. We don't really need to go further. Like, just when your child comes to you and say, I don't feel comfortable, to your point, they don't have a filter. They don't know what a mask is. They don't know how to
Mm,
be inauthentic. They are more dramatic or exaggerated in their reactions as opposed to like being guarded or feeling the need to be inauthentic. And so when your child comes to you and say, so and so makes me feel uncomfortable, having that conversation with them and talking to them about what exactly made you feel uncomfortable and normalizing that is okay and thanking them for coming to you
yeah.
and being open and saying, this is what I felt when X, Y, and Z happened, because that takes courage. And when we choose not to believe a child who comes to us and
Mm.
say, this is what's happening, we're teaching them that their emotions are deceptive
Yes.
and that they can't
We
trust
do need a class.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes. I literally just
Yes.
wrote that. Our response will determine whether or not they learn to put a filter on it. Right? So
Mm,
Yes.
maybe we start teaching them how to communicate their emotions in a respectful way. But I
Mhm.
think if we shut them down, then they're going to learn
mhm.
there's no room for my emotions. There's no room for my thoughts and feelings. So next time I feel this way, I need to go and sit down and keep it all
Right.
in.
Yeah.
So when we
Yeah.
Exactly.
make room for it, then they'll learn how to continue showing up and they'll be comfortable with
Exactly.
being able to be their full authentic self. We're modeling for
Absolutely.
them.
We're modeling
Modeling.
for them.
Yes.
which is how we break those the generational patterns that don't work a lot
Absolutely.
of times, that keep us stuck a lot of times.
Hmm. Yeah. Because, like Megan said, what happens is they're not going to trust telling you anything else. You don't listen to me anyways. You don't hear me out. I told you the first time. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. I told you. You didn't hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You didn't
That's
hear
when they
me.
start to develop that belief of I don't matter, my feelings
Mhm.
don't matter. And although we may look at it like, oh, well, that was just one little incident. I'm trained in EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and that's what we process trauma. But when we start processing trauma, we do what we call a float back, and we start at the most recent memory rather, and we float back. And as we continue to float back, we're floating back on these feelings and these thoughts or beliefs about themselves and the beliefs about others in the world. And oftentimes it goes back to a childhood memory. I had a session the other
Mm-hmm.
day where I asked, at what point did you start to believe that you no longer mattered? And they were able to go right back to that point in childhood where I said I
Wow.
didn't feel comfortable and nobody listened to me. So from there, I didn't think my voice mattered. So now as an adult, I'm
Hmm.
showing up as though I don't matter because nobody
Amazing.
taught me that I do matter. You taught me that I didn't because of the way
Hmm.
that you responded.
Even in terms of allowing children to speak when adults are talking, that's something that I run into a lot with my own children. Wanting to break that generational belief that children should be seen and not heard,
Hmm.
and giving space for my children to speak, but also when I'm having company and there's a lot of adults around, or there's a new adult that I'm trying to get to know, but my child is there and they're trying to get my attention there, it could create some tension. But I still stand behind this idea of I want to give my child a voice.
Hmm.
I want them to be able to speak up. I want them to be able to engage in a conversation, share an idea in a conversation when it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And so, but that's not everyone else's belief. I still stand on they have to
Yeah.
learn. It still goes back to modeling. So, using opportunities, especially like if we're home and it's their safe space, but I chose to have company over, I should always stand behind my child and use opportunities such as that as learning opportunities to teach them so that they have a full understanding as to why this particular moment was inappropriate for you to intervene or cut someone off as they're speaking, as opposed to you just don't speak at all. And
Hmm.
then they have confusion and a lack of understanding as to why. You
Yeah.
know, I still
Cons-
remember the day that
Mhm.
I
Go
still
ahead.
remember the day being in a car with my mom and her cousin. It's an adult cousin, of course, because it's her first cousin. I remember when I spoke out and they listened, which
Mm.
is important because I remember having the thought, oh, they didn't talk over me. They didn't continue in that conversation like I wasn't speaking. They stopped and they paid attention. And it was a significant moment for me. But up to that moment, I never really realized that I was feeling neglected or that I was feeling unheard. It was just a very significant moment when they did hear me. And I think
Because
that
it
that
was
speaks volumes.
normalized.
Right.
It was normalized for you to be shut down and not to be heard. So when it does happen, it's like, oh, this is different.
It's different, right? Yes.
Constant, but I had a question about, you mentioned how you go about your beliefs and how you are communicating and allowing your children to communicate with you. What does that belief, what did it stem from? Where did it come from? Is that something you learn from childhood or something you learn not, to do because you didn't get it? Like, where did that come from?
I think it's a mix. I think it is me, myself, feeling unheard in my own core family.
Hmm.
um, Feeling like I didn't have a voice. And sometimes I still, if I'm being honest, struggle with that whole term, finding a voice. I didn't speak up for myself. I heard TD Jakes, he said this a while ago, a long time ago. He never doubted whether or not he was a good communicator because anytime he would speak, his mom made space. She acted as though she was interested in anything he had to say. So he always had this confidence in the fact that he could communicate. I didn't. And it's not because someone told me to shut up. It's the undertones, you know,
Yeah.
that sticks with you. So that's one thing. Another thing is I work with a lot of kids, and a lot of the tension or the struggle that they feel when they come in to see me, they don't have the language to communicate what they actually feel, or the dynamic, the interactions that are happening when they're with adults. They don't have the language to communicate what's actually occurring. All they know to say is so and so is mean, or so and so ignores me. They don't know to say that, like, they can't go to a specific time when they went to their mom or they went to their dad or they went to their grandparent, and their grandparent or whoever is watching TV, and they had something really exciting that they wanted to share, or they had something really important, scary that they wanted to share. And when they tried to get their caregiver's attention, the facial expression communicated, "You are bothering me." The child doesn't understand that.
Yeah.
What they will take away from that, though, is a belief. People don't want to hear what I have to say. Or I'm a burden. I'm a problem. And when you ask the child, like, where did you learn that? Who told you that? They can't really say, oh, yeah, my mom, because it's not really being said.
Yeah.
It's all behavior and it's all undertones. It's all emotion, you know?
Yeah, it's what's perceived.
Right.
Yeah. So,
I think I love what you said about, like, even when you're at home and they may interject into an adult conversation, because I remember growing up, it was, you don't talk while adults are talking. And so even now, like, as an adult without biological children, it's hard for me to unlearn that, because I'm like, ooh, this is an adult conversation and you're interjecting. But you're absolutely right that we are in their space. And
Mm,
in that space, they've been taught that they can share their thoughts and feelings, because again, they don't know. They weren't taught what we were taught. So being able to create space for that and modeling when it's appropriate to jump in and when it's not. And I think us as adults being able to be mindful that if I don't want this child to jump into this conversation because it's not appropriate or it's not age appropriate, then maybe I don't need to have the conversation while the child is around.
right. Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like when I first had my daughter. I love watching The Housewives, but I'm like, I cannot watch that. I don't want to put that in her head. So I didn't watch it for a long time until, she got a little older, going to school or put headphones on and watch it because, you want to be. But yeah.
Yeah.
Malona, did you want to add anything to that? Because I'm going to go to the next topic and it actually flows right into this one, actually. No? Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about some parenting styles. You already mentioned a couple already, both Megan and Constance. So I think this part is like maybe an educational piece of it for us, for our audience as well. We have the authoritarian parenting style, which is known to respond because I said so when a child questions the reasons behind a rule, or may use punishments instead of discipline. Ooh, I love that. Punishment instead of discipline. Now y'all have to help me distinguish the difference between punishment and discipline. So should I stop there or go right into the next parenting style? Going to the next one? Okay. All right. I just don't want to go into all of it and then all right. So an example of that would be when make sure, yeah, example of that would be when it comes to rules, you believe it's my way or the highway. And then there's the authoritative parenting style. They invest in time and energy into preventing behavior problems before they start. They also use positive disciplining strategies to reinforce positive behavior, like praise and reward system. An example of that would be explaining the reasons behind your rules. authoritarian parent would not want that. It's my way, right? And then there is a permissive parenting style, and this they usually take on more of a friend role than a parent role. They often encourage their children to talk with them about their problems. Example of that would be rules, but rarely enforce them. Like you implement rules, but you don't really enforce them. It's, sometimes you'll enforce it, sometimes you do. And then there is the uninvolved parenting style. That one expect children to raise themselves. They don't ask questions about the child's school or homework, or really even know where the child is at. So let's dive into that topic.
A
Okay.
lot of time, we say it takes a village to raise children, and so you will get these different parenting styles. But I think it's being mindful about, complementing one another, kind of balancing it out. For example, with me and my toddler, I think I fall between the more like authoritative side where we hash things out. I'm pretty transparent about rules and limitations so that we can move forward. So, if you behave this way, it will lead to this. If you behave this way, it can also lead to this. So consequences and rewards works well for me and my toddler. But also sometimes I may, dial back and fall into that permissive state where I'm like, okay, free range. It's a kid's world. Figure it out on your own. But there are still like rules and limitations. So I think
Right.
knowing that you don't have to do it all on your own, that there could be a complementary approach to your parenting, whether it's from mom and dad, whether it's from grandparents, aunties, uncles, cousins, neighbors, just soaking that in, I think really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So,
agree.
me too. Me too. When it comes to Aquila, when you said discipline versus
Punishment.
punishment,
Hmm.
I think discipline is making room for a two-way interaction, whereas punishment is just go to your room, just taking something away. With discipline, I think it allows for room for discussion, explaining behaviors, explaining, like Omalala said, consequences, and rewards. So just being able to explain the interaction rather than you're punished and that's it. Like that sounds more like a one-way interaction to me than discipline being that two-way interaction. So as you were reading the different parenting styles, what came to mind for me, which I've never really looked at it this way, but I took into consideration the capacity of the parent. So a lot of times when we're looking at parents and the way that they show up, it's like, well, you're a parent, so you need to parent this way. And in
Mm.
that, we're eliminating the person as an individual and making parenting their only role. I think we have to take into account the fact that they are an adult, the fact that they are dealing with their own emotions and their own challenges. And sometimes there's a decrease in capacity, which could cause us to either go up or down. So when I say up or down, I'm imagining us being in a healthy space of authoritative, right? And if I go up, then I go into an authoritarian because I don't have the capacity to show up. I told you to do something, you didn't do it. Go to your room. Like I just need you out of this space. And then the permissive, I don't have the energy. Like just what I don't care
Yeah.
as long as nobody's crying and nobody's hurt. Like I don't know where they at. They went outside. They gonna come back. Like, but we have to take, the whole adult into perspective. And like you guys said, we do have a village, and so being able in those moments to rely on our village. And I'm not saying that the way that the parent shows up doesn't interfere or impact the child. It does. But again, we also have to be able to hold space for the fact that we're humans and we don't always
Mm.
get it right. And it is still the responsibility of the parent to be able to identify the space that they're in, how they're showing up, how that's impacting their child, and what they need to do as a result of how they're showing up. Like I always teach my clients to evaluate their level of capacity. Where are you? And after you're able to identify where you are and how you're feeling, what do you need in order for you to get back to a healthier space?
Yeah.
Last point. So I'll use a car for an example. Your car has a gauge to identify how much gas it has. And depending on the gas determines how far I'm able to drive. And if I know that I'm lower on gas, I need to stop for gas so that I have the capacity to drive for a longer distance.
I like
Absolutely.
that. Good analogy.
And that's the piece. It goes right back to that quote that I shared earlier from Eric Erickson. You know, the
Mhm.
task of parenthood, it falls on who? The
The
parent, the
parents.
individual. So a lot of us, we do have traumatic backgrounds. We do have histories. Even though we've taken on different roles, we still have a history that's operating within us, that's pulling us back, that's protesting, right? And
Mm.
so we have to take a look inside to see what's operating. I like the fact that you said, how much capacity do you have? Where are you? That that point right there, where are you? And being able to have an understanding of what you are capable to do, where, how you feel, like how does your nervous system feel in the moment. Like you said, we are vacillating up and down in terms of our emotional safety. Sometimes we feel very elated, we have a lot of energy, we feel very confident, we can explore possibilities and new
Mhm.
ideas because we are very high on that ladder of safety. But sometimes we are very anxious and we're worried and we're agitated, and we don't have a whole lot of energy because we just got off work, or sometimes we are just shut down. We just want to numb out. We don't want to think about anything. So, where are you really on that in terms of your safety level? Because that's going to determine how you show up for your kids.
Yeah, and so just also normalizing that, as parents, that we have our own experience and that's fine, and not feeling discouraged in that moment. Could just look like role modeling what regulation looks like. I love to do that with my son. Is like, okay, we're in the middle of a transition, or there's a lot of stimulation, and you're asking for attention and you're demanding this, but let's just take a step back. Let's take a deep breath together. Let's go for a walk. Let's swing. Let's hug each other until our nervous system becomes regulated. You are, allowed to do that. You don't always have to respond to stimuli or demands from your children. I think as women, we have that, that sense of urgency that we have to just respond automatically, when a lot of times, the kids are just fine. They're just wanting attention. So, uh, to me, for me, I could be just singing while I'm walking to his room, or, I could just detour and make a cup of tea and then go sit down and read a book with him. But just being able to role model that for children is imperative for teaching those emotional regulation techniques.
I love that. And with that being said, what comes to mind is consistency, right? So, whatever style of parenting approach that you take, I think consistency is important for the child, especially doing a behavior, you know? When a behavior happens, now you want to be tough. Let's say a permissive parent. Now you want to be tough for me and tell me, listen to me, authoritative parent. So that's when the inconsistency happens and more behavior happens. And then it transitions to when you become a teenager. Then you have way more behaviors. So I think consistency is really important. And for me, I think starting off very early with being consistent with the type of parenting style that you're going to implement, it's important. It's imperative because they need to know, you know, who is my mom? What is she going to take from me? What is she going to allow? What she's not going to allow. So I know which button to push and which button not to push.
I think that will also assist in regulating their emotions as well, because if I don't know what version of you I'm going to get, I would imagine that that increases anxiety. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, she's stressed out today, is she happy? Like, I don't really know what to expect when I go in here. So there's that internal discomfort. And then as we're
Yeah.
having this conversation, acknowledging the fact that many adults are not as emotionally aware,
Mm.
and so they're doing what they saw, and they don't
Hmm.
know that that was unhealthy, because I mean, we're just now learning, right? How to show up
Yeah.
as a parent, how to show up as a healthy adult, what healthy interactions are, healthy communication. And most are not in therapy. I mean, therapy is increasing amongst our generation, but there are many that still are not. So the way that they're showing up is, I mean, this is what my parents did. I'm fine.
Yeah.
So this is what I need to do.
Facts. I hear that a lot. So this is what my parents did. So I'm doing it.
Yeah. And I think I want to give a moment to just advocate for, family therapy counseling that can address some of those patterns. Is just recognizing like you don't have to figure it out on your own. You don't have to navigate so much uncertainty, that there are spaces where parents and children can come together, or even spaces for kids to, experience play therapy and learn emotions, talk about coping skills, education as well.
I think that's so important. I tell people a lot that I think as adults, sometimes parents expect for their children to respond to their emotions in a healthy way. But as adults, we're just now learning what we're feeling and how to respond. I mean, I start every session with, all right, how's our mood today? And I always get, I'm good. And I'm like, okay, well, let's use another word other than good, fine, okay, or well. Or because those are the automatic responses. And so we're having to really tap in to be able to identify what our emotion is. And as kids, they don't know because they've never experienced these before. Like they
Yeah.
just got here. So they're just now figuring out. So I think when we make room for emotions, we're able to educate them on the emotions, what they're feeling, and how to respond in a healthy way, rather than expecting for them to automatically know how to do that when we obviously still don't really know how to do it.
I
Absolutely.
like that. I
That's the
like
beauty.
that.
I think the beauty in life is that we're here to evolve, and so no one is going to be perfect. And then also knowing like we don't have to heal ourselves to death. We can
Mm,
make mistakes and we can repair and we can move forward with confidence. It's a very humbling,
yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
I love that you are so intentional, Amalola, with your son, when you doing what if it's yoga, going for a walk, when you know that, this is time. I love that.
Absolutely. The other day, my son woke me up and was like, Mom, you need to go do yoga. He's like, it's time for you.
Oh,
Was like, why did you say that? He's like, well, it's going to help you feel good. It's going to make you stretch. And so just him kind of attuning to me in my routine. I'm, postpartum 6 months now. And so I've been doing my yoga and my daily walks. And he knows like that is what I do to fill my cup. And so he likes to see me do that. And I think it also encourages him to explore what fills his cup. And so while I'm stretching, he's coloring, or while we're walking, jogging in place now. And so all these
awesome.
things learning from me. And I'm grateful for the relationship that we have, for sure.
Awesome. One thing that we didn't dive into, when one parent is one style and the other parent is another style,
Mm.
clashing or not agreeing. But that's just something to think about. I don't know if y'all want to address that, talk about that, but
I think the objective is just to meet on a common ground. We can have different styles, but how do we approach the children? That's a discussion that should be held. It's like, how much do you put in, and how much should you dial back, and how do our styles complement each other so that we're not bombarding or overwhelming our child?
yeah, I think it would be great for maybe a lot of people don't know about the parenting styles, but they're exhibiting it, right? So maybe it's important for people to actually research it and read about it and maybe learn, oh, I am that type of parenting, and then my husband is this way, or my child's father is this way, or whatever it is. So, educating yourself and, like you say, collaborating together and making it work. So, we're going to move to I think this is our last topic, y'all. If I'm not mistaken, which is the social media and parent shaming. Wow. So, we know social media has taken over the world everywhere, not just in America. So, one story that came to mind is an article about a mom in Ontario. I don't know where that's at. An Ontario mother made her two sons walk 7 kilometers to school as a punishment for being rude to their bus driver. She not only did that, and then she posted it online. Experts are saying that this kind of online shaming may cause psychological harm to a child. Thoughts?
I think that's Canada.
Yeah, Toronto. It's right there. Toronto, Canada.
Yeah, it's that perception of shame. It's that perception of guilt, and those are often difficult emotions to navigate. So not only did they were placed in this experiment that she sent them on a 7-kilometer walk, but also having to deal with the emotional side of that is just not always easy. And so my question that comes up for me is like, what was going through mom's head? What kind of, initiated her to make that decision and post it? Where's her emotional state at? Right.
So it wasn't about the punishment or the disciplining. It was more about the social media posting, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're living in a world where they post everything now, moms, dads, whoever, posting everything about their children. There was a Toronto counselor who said that such disciplinary actions reflects misguided thinking on the parts of the parents who believe that if a child is made to feel guilty, they won't repeat this misdeed. Unfortunately, that's not the way discipline works, she said. When we use punitive measures, in this case, extremely punitive because this is public shaming and humiliation, it's not only shredding the relationship between the parent and child, but it's also damaging the child's self-esteem and it's very hurtful to the soul. Ooh,
I agree.
I think
yeah.
it's
I think
important.
that our understanding of discipline sometimes it's very fixed. Discipline is a form of teaching, is a form of guiding. So discipline doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to punish you or that I'm going to give you consequences. It is back to the whole we're modeling, we're teaching, right? And so yes, I wonder as well about the emotional state of mom and her own conditioning and what caused her to believe that it was okay to discipline her child in that way. My concern is the form of discipline she used, as well as the step further to post it. What was the motivation behind that? What was the outcome she was looking for, when she chose to do that?
So you don't agree with the style of disciplining, basically. That's what I'm hearing you say, right? Or the idea of posting it as well.
I personally don't agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that when it comes to discipline, we should always put the relationship at the forefront.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal should always, or the question that I personally lead with is always in terms of relationship, connection before correction, right? It is not the child's responsibility to make sure the relationship stays intact. It is my responsibility as a mom, as a parent, to make sure the relationship is intact. And if I made a similar choice to tell my child as a punishment or as a discipline, sorry, a consequence or punishment, you're going to walk to school as opposed to riding the bus. Why? That's the question.
Yeah.
What's the lesson that I'm going to learn in
Yeah.
doing that? What's the long-term goal? What need is being met?
Mm-hmm.
Whose needs are being met?
Mm-hmm.
Who's actually parenting here?
I
Um,
love you keep saying that. Who's actually parenting here?
who's actually parenting? Yeah. Is it your history? Is this
Hmm.
something that was done to you? Is this something that you've learned?
Yeah.
You know, is that what's showing up in the moment? Because in the moment when we tell our children to walk to school because they misbehaved on the bus, or we post this whole incident happening, we betrayed that child.
Mm-hmm.
In the moment, we've betrayed that child. That's a form of bullying.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I can only imagine how hard it is to bounce back from a betrayal from an adult. So just betraying your own children is a lot more wounding, I think, and deeper.
Yes, for sure.
Because you're their safe space. So if the
Exactly.
person that I view as the safest has betrayed me, then that means I can't trust anyone else. Perception. I think it's important to start at the root. the root being what caused this discipline, what caused this punishment, or whatever word we're using there. And it was the fact that they were being rude to the bus driver. What happened? What made you show up that way? How are you feeling when you got on the bus that caused you to respond in that way? And I think if we're able to attack the root, then we can ensure that the behavior doesn't continue. But if we just start at the end and we're clipping the leaves, which is punishing them because they were being rude, then the next time that something happens that causes them to want to be rude, they haven't learned how to respond in a different way. So now maybe they
Exactly.
didn't respond that way, right? So now they're doing something else and now they have a different punishment. But if we teach them how to respond, to eliminate them being rude or whatever caused them to respond in that way, then they know how to respond healthier in the future and there's not a need for a punishment. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. I feel a lot of parents, and I'm guilty of this as well, we parent from a lens of fear. So when the child was disrespectful on the bus, what was the thought process of mom? Was there embarrassment? Did she feel shame? Because it makes it understandable that she would punish with shame if she felt shame.
Hmm.
So a lot of times, a lot of parents, they focus on morale before they focus on building a relationship with their children and prioritize attachment. We should prioritize attachment before we start talking about morale. If the child has attachment, the child matures. And then we can start talking about morality. They can understand that, they can process that, they can live up to that. But if they don't have a relationship with me, they're not going to listen to me when I start teaching them about moral issues. I won't have the power to influence them when it comes to moral issues. So relationship is always priority.
Yeah, I agree.
I use the same quote, connection before correction. And so I'm curious, like, how did she transition out of that incident? Maybe they got kicked off the school bus. And then, did she have an opportunity to repair before she just sent them walking? Because otherwise that just sounds like a big, big wound of, betrayal and abandonment almost.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say they came to therapy, family therapy, parents and child or children. How would you? I mean, I saw the educational piece that all three of y'all mentioned, how to go about it, but how would you facilitate that conversation where mom can recognize, that she did shame her children and maybe should apologize and feel the need to apologize versus I'm only doing it because we're here. That's a tough question.
Start back again at the beginning, being able to, okay, child, Johnny, tell me what happened on the bus. Let's just start there so we can get an understanding, because a lot of times I think when kids get in trouble, they're not given the space to share their perspective. It's just, well, this adult said that you did that, so now you're in trouble. And it's like, well, the adult wasn't listening to me, or the adult wasn't taking how I felt into perspective and I responded. So being able to make room for Johnny to be heard in a safe space and acknowledging Johnny's feelings and reflecting or being able to clarify that with mom, being able to explain, well, what Johnny is saying, that when this happened, this is how he felt. And then asking Johnny, how did it feel when you had to walk? How did it feel for that to be, placed on social media? And just allowing the space, because I would imagine that maybe mom didn't do that. And I would
Mhm.
imagine that after Johnny got back home from school, it was, you hungry? And we never even got a chance to talk about what happened so that we can move forward. It's just swept under the rug and continued.
Two things. So basically, mom taking accountability for her actions, and the child also taking accountability for their action, what they did in the bus, and being able to express what happened, how it happened, and why it happened.
Can I also
I
add
think.
that I think it's important for the child to feel covered?
Mhm.
Mm,
And as I'm saying that, like, I'm thinking biblically, but
Mhm.
when you make a mistake, it being covered rather than exposed. I want to say
mm,
Noah. Noah had a drinking problem, and one of his sons, I
Oh
want
yeah.
to say, saw him and covered him, right? So
Hmm.
being able to know that you can make a mistake and this is your safe space and we're going to take accountability and acknowledge that it was a mistake, but I'm not going to expose you because you're
Yeah,
human and you're growing.
And you're
I got it. It
vulnerable.
was, yes, I got what I forgot. It was sometimes, a lot of the times actually, parents, caregivers, whoever, when we discipline, we do it out of anger, we do it out of emotions versus taking a time out, like you said, hearing a child and talking about it, but you're angry, so you're gonna react with your anger.
Which is that healthy modeling for how to respond to your emotions.
Yeah.
I think if they were to come into the office for a family session, of course, this particular incident may be at the forefront of their minds, and there most likely will be a lot of emotions involved. And of course, making space for them to kind of sort through all of that. But if this occurred, her having the child walk as opposed to taking the school bus and then posting it, this is not the first occurrence, most likely. There most likely have been other things that have happened that have led to the emotions that they feel about each other. And so, really, having this family come in is not about the particular incident, it's about the family and how the family does family. And going back to something that Megan said a while back, like, where are you guys in terms of relationship?
Yeah.
Trying to start from where we are and then work backwards so we can get to the beginning. Where did this all begin? How do you actually see, let's say that the child's name is Johnny, like, how do you view Johnny? What do you think about Johnny? What makes your eyes light up when you think of Johnny? What are the good qualities, the positive qualities that he has? What do you admire? What do you love? Get them to see the person, not the behavior. Because the behavior most likely is just a protective mechanism they've used to navigate life. I wouldn't go into let's work on fixing you, mom, even though there are some things there. But what happened to mom when she was growing up? Probably a similar incident. So, I mean,
So breaking generational barriers, I guess. I think, oh, am I trying to say something?
Yeah, and that's the beauty of family counseling. You get to come in and you get to set up that internal system. You get to see like the dynamics between parents and children and kind of role modeling that in session where the professional can kind of broach or inquire more about those patterns or that history. I think it's about developing structure, having a very structured session and developing the skills so that they can repair that family system.
Yeah. As we move forward, we to conclusion of this episode. One of the other topics that I wanted to mention before we conclude today was parenting in a digital age. Just maybe awareness that 2/3 of parents in the United States say parenting is harder today than it was 20 years ago, with many citing technologies like social media and smartphones as a reason. So, what are your thoughts about that? How do you find the balance between embracing technology and setting healthy boundaries?
Well, for me personally, I have two under four, so technology wasn't really like, introduced early, but when I do give it to my son, it's for educational programming, just ensuring that he has an objective, like he's using it for something and not just for idle time and not just for entertainment either, because they should
Yeah.
be exploring and playing and learning about themselves. So I think just recognizing that technology is not everything, it does not teach life skills, if you
Mm.
will. Having a balance between the two is just setting a schedule. My son only gets his electronic like over the weekend. During the weekdays, I'm very intentional about his undivided 30-minute window where we're reading, we're writing, we're drawing, we're making music, we're cooking, we're doing all those daily life skills that technology can't offer.
I love that.
Balancing, again, to piggyback, balancing the amount of time that they're able to be on to utilize technology. Also, there are different apps that we personally use in my family to monitor what's being said on their phones. The app that we use is Bark. And so, I mean, it's very sensitive, so it will pick up on just about anything that they believe is offensive. But our kids know that we're using that to monitor like their use on their phones. But also, they're not allowed to be on every social media app. So there's only certain apps that we will allow them to be on. And the only one, honestly, that is able to be, like, for instance, on TikTok is my oldest daughter. She's 13. She's the only one that's allowed to have a TikTok page, and we follow that page. And so there's a lot of transparency.
Yeah.
In terms of that. And then there's a lot of education about safety, what we say, what we don't say, who we are communicating with. Try to be very open about what a friend is
Mm.
and, who would fall under the category of a friend. And then really identifying who other people are in our lives and who they are to us, and making sure that we protect our family.
I really like the usage of bark.
Yes.
And I'm gonna say being in your kids' business, but basically
Mm.
having open communication with them, being able to educate them on, like you said, what a friend is, because they do have a view of, well, we played together at school, so that's my friend. But how are they
Mm-hmm.
teaching you when you guys are not playing? How are you guys playing? That's making you consider them a friend. And I think that goes a long way, because even as adults, we have to have conversations of, well, yeah, we've identified them as a friend, but how do they make you feel? And
Right.
just because they've been there doesn't mean that they're really a friend.
Exactly.
I think it's important to note that technology isn't going anywhere. And so
Mm-hmm.
those of us that came from environments, ages, whatever, where technology wasn't as widely used in childhood, doesn't mean that we have to take that away from this generation, these newer generations, because technology isn't going anywhere. For one, they have to learn how to use it when it comes to education, but using this as an opportunity to teach safety and healthy use of technology.
Yeah.
So we can't do away with it, but how can we use it in a safe and in a healthy way?
Right.
I like that. I think education, you keep mentioning education, educating your children, communicating, because if you don't do that, they're going to go to school. They have friends or associates who have phones, who have TikTok, who have Instagram. They're going to get exposed to those things. So it's important to have those conversations with them and set those moral, standards, what you should and you shouldn't do, and be open to them coming to you and telling you, this person has it. 'Cause I have a 6-year-old, and she knows what TikTok is only because she has older cousins who have it, and they talk about it all the time. And mommy, TikTok. I'm like, no, you're not allowed to go on TikTok. And then they also have, what is it called? That video game, virtual world thing that they do when they come here and spend the night. And she always tells them, since she was probably 3, my mommy said, I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to go on that site. I said, thank you. Well, those are conversations that we have. Had I not had that conversation with her, she would probably be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So it's, parents, communicate with your kids. So yes, so ladies, this was our final topic today. How are we going to conclude today? We're wrapping up. So I think one thing that I can give away that we can take away from this is that as we wrap up is, as parents, caregivers, whatever role you're playing in a child's life, we must remember that parenting is a journey and it's filled with different perspectives and choices. So sometimes we don't make the best choices, but it's okay. We have that space to grow from it, learn from it, and do better and do better. So the goal is not to judge, but to foster understanding and open dialogue. So join us for our next time. Hats off as we continue to explore the complexities of parenthood. Any last final words before we conclude today, y'all?
This was fun. Can't wait to do it again.
This was fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
I
The first
enjoyed
one
it.
always prepare you for the second, the third, and the fourth one. So it's a learning journey. All right. So as we log off, hats off, ladies.
That's all.